Hello, folks. Thank you for joining. I know we had a kind of a break. Some of you were not able to access the webinar last time, uh, so we had to make some changes in our GoToMeeting setup. Hopefully, everyone is able to listen to me and they're able to see my screen as well. I see a good bunch of people here. That's great. Just because we've had a little bit of gap, just want to remind you, my name is Anurag Saxena and I am an associate of Search School. I love Agile, love mentoring. I've been working in Agile for more than 10 years now. Uh, and I've been an Agile coach for more than six. And every day, I love doing Agile transformations, bringing teams up to speed, mentoring people, and just spreading the knowledge on how Agile can make things so much better for all software engineers and even more. Okay, so today's agenda, again, we're gonna reserve about an hour, 50 minutes to an hour, depending on how the response is, how much you guys want to interact. Um, uh, we'll spend first of all, we'll spend some time on the flashcard, about 5 minutes, understanding what backlog is, um, and the second part would be about epics, themes, categorization, and organization of your backlog or stories or epics. Okay, so we'll spend a lot of time discussing that. It's a very vast subject. There have been books that are written just on organizing backlogs, so we'll try to condense it in a much higher level, uh, in a brief form. Okay, and if we have time, I'll try to show you how those epics and stories look like in the um, agile management tool that I'm using. Um, and then we'll look at some exercises to make sure that we have really learned everything that we wanted to today. Just a reminder: there is a questions box in your GTM, and there's a chat box. So feel free to use any of them. Usually, the questions box is most useful. So if you have any questions, just feel free to start writing them. Um, and even if I'm not able to get to it right away, there's a little bit of time that I'll give in between sections to make sure that I go through your questions and answer them. Okay, so let's get started. All right. So backlog. Okay, by definition, a backlog is a union of all the user stories or features that are desired in a product but are unfinished. Okay, so unfinished is a keyword here. And if you are unfamiliar, I'm hoping all of you are familiar with user stories, but user stories are nothing but features, but written in a very specific, very defined form. There are other videos in which there are other trainings and webinars in which I've covered them in great details, and the videos are available. So feel free to go and have a look at that if you have any confusion about user stories. Um, there are different types of backlogs. Okay, backlog in general um, is just a product backlog, okay, which has everything that is unfinished. Okay, and then there are all these different types of backlogs. Okay, so there is a sprint and iteration backlog. I'll just use the pen here. Okay, the sprint and iteration backlog, which is specific to a particular sprint. Okay, all the stories that you're planning to do in a particular sprint. That is your sprint backlog. Okay, and then you have a prioritized backlog. Okay, so uh, you can see the definition of backlog. It is not saying whether the stories are, it's kind of a set, a union and a set. Okay, however, that whole set is not very useful unless it is really prioritized, because you need that for sprint planning, you need that for iteration planning, you need it for so many things. Okay, without prioritization, it is almost impossible for you to execute on anything. So it's it's important that the the backlog is prioritized. Okay, so that level of refinement is called prioritized backlog. And then there's a release backlog. Okay, so if you have um, usually you have a bunch of work that you did in various iterations or sprints, it goes out in a release. um, and if you do, for a medium scale to high level enterprises, it is not unusual for you to have thousands of stories in your backlog. If you were just to put a union of all that in your backlog would be very bulky. Okay, so what you do is you you, you identify stories that you are going to attempt to finish in a particular release. Okay, you can do that using forecasting, using velocity. There are various ways you can decide, after you have done prioritization. So in all the stories that are unfinished for a release, they are called as release backlog. Okay, so there are tools these days that allow you to kind of segregate uh, various different various different stories, put them in a release buckets. Okay, and you only see the release buckets when you start doing sprint planning. So you have a whole big bunch. You pick few things out of it, call them into a release, and then you cherry pick things from there and put it in the release back in the sprint backlog. Okay, so your backlog is becoming shorter and shorter as you're getting closer to execution. Okay, and there's another form of backlog which is called risk adjusted backlog. This is also important to understand if you're going to uh, work as a product owner, or even architects, or agile coach. Risk adjusted backlog um, is a very specific thing. In agile, risks, they are handled in a slightly different way than in a traditional way. Okay, what you do is you identify those risks in your backlog, whether it is your release backlog or your complete backlog, the whole product backlog. You identify the stories that have risks associated with it. Okay, you do all that objective calculation, risk score. You can find, what is the impact going to be, if a particular event occurs. So you can do all that objective assessment of the risk. However, you also have you have also tagged the stories that have risk associated with them. So then it becomes a trade-off. Product owner or engineering decides, which ones they want to go after first. Whether you want to go after the stories that are big risk early in uh, the release iterations, in the early iterations of a release, or you want to plow through the work that you can accomplish easily with low risk. You want to do that and come back to the high risk items. So it is kind of a trade-off. Okay, so it depends really on a lot of things, the kind of the kind of audience or customers you're expecting for release, uh, who what are the kind of resources you have available throughout that whole release cycle. It's a different thing. It also depends on the domain, so there could be various different dimensions on which you want to strike this trade-off. Okay, the important thing here is that you have identified the risk, and you're doing prioritization. You're doing this prioritization in your backlog, knowing that risk very well. Okay, there's also a concept of risk-based spike, which I took as a flashcard just a few webinars ago. Okay, which is very closely linked with this risk-adjusted backlog. If you have stories that have risks, you may want to take a spike. Spike is nothing but a time boxed duration set aside to inculcate more confidence in a solution or identify a solution for a problem, for a tough problem. Okay, so this backlog overall, I'll just read the definition one more time. This is a generic definition, and then you can have all these refined forms of backlog, which are more practical when you start really working, employing agile. You will have to come across these. Okay, so backlog, by its very definition, is a union of all the user stories that are desired in a product. but are unfinished? Okay, I see there are a couple of questions already. Um, how do we find the stories that are going to go to release? Okay, um, so there is a concept of release planning, which is mostly owned by product owners, um, or product managers. When you're doing release planning, you have a timeline in mind. You have, against the vision, well, not against the vision, towards the vision you're working, and you have this product roadmap. Okay, so you try to align your releases with the product, with the milestones in the product roadmap. Now, based on these milestones, you will have stories against them. Okay, we are going to see how we can organize stories um, in Agile very shortly. Okay, so today's whole discussion is based on that theme. Um, once you're able to organize yourself, okay, which is the primary responsibility of a product owner can also come in different flavors. They could be analysts from the functional side and non-functional side. Okay, so there could be a mix of things. So once you have found your milestone on the product roadmap, you have also found somewhat alignment with the releases. Okay, once you have found your releases based on the milestone items, what you can do is you can take out stories, um, and start putting them in the release backlog. Okay, so you can create an area in your tool, whichever tool you're using, or if you're using agile boards, you start picking out stories that belong to accomplishing that milestone in the release, and start putting them in the release backlog. Okay, and now you have a release backlog. Okay, so idea is to make collect fewer and fewer stories as you're coming closer to the execution. Okay, there's another question on sprint backlog. So sprint backlog, how is sprint backlog different than backlog? Sprint backlog is a type of a backlog. So sprint, when the basic concept that you're doing iterative development, and sprint is a more of a scrum terminology. When we are when you're doing sprint planning, so sprint planning is understand your velocity. As a team, you come together with the product owner and your agile coach or scrum master, and you identify stories in your release backlog or prioritize backlog, and you try to do estimation. Based on the estimates and your velocity, you take out stories that you can reasonably accomplish in a particular sprint. Okay, sprint is a duration in which you're going to do the implementation. Okay, design, implementation, all that hard work. So when you cherry pick those stories based on priorities and estimates, you put them in a sprint backlog. Okay, that is, put them in the sprint you commit. Just one second. Sorry about that. So that's about sprint backlog. Okay, once you have identified stories that you can conveniently, reasonably finish in a particular sprint, that's your sprint backlog. Okay. All right. So let's keep moving. There's quite a bit that we want to finish today. All right. So epics, um, I'm going to start talking about the organization of the backlog and the stories, and how what are certain things that can help us prioritize, uh, basically identify what are the values that you're getting from all these different user stories. Okay, so in general, there's a lot of text that is written here, but I'm going to focus on epics first, okay, and then we'll go to story map, story backlog, uh, minimal marketable feature, and a few other things like that, themes. So an epic is a big is a is a is an abstract. Think of epic as an abstract story. Okay, so you write an epic just like you would write a story, but it is abstract. It is not a little. It's not aligned with the invest principle of story writing. Okay, so what happens is the epic decomposes itself into various stories. Okay, so every epic should have at least two stories inside. It should at least decompose itself into two stories. Okay, usually there are more. And I'll show you some of the epics that we have written here in the project that I'm working on. So once you have decomposed these stories, this epic into stories, or sometimes it is called breakdown. Okay, so there are different terms, different metaphors that are used by different organizations. But in general, okay, the epic is abstract. Stories are more specific. Okay, and also it's possible that some of the stories may form a theme. Okay, so you can collect some stories in certain themes, and themes are very important. And we'll look at how. Okay, themes help you do a lot of things. Okay, and we'll see how we do that. So here's an example of an epic. Um, Epics are very, very important. Okay, so those of you who are really planning to use or already working in agile environment, it is almost impossible to work without epics. Okay, it's a great tool. It's a great technique to organize your stories. Okay, so in this example, you can see how it, we are writing epic exactly the same way as you would um, if you were writing a story. As a VP of marketing, I want to review the performance of historical promotional campaigns so that I can identify and repeat profitable ones. Okay, so um, even though it's not very obvious, it's this it is still abstract. Okay, um, it's it's not very clear because it's high level, and it has a potential of breaking itself into more specific things. Okay, so here are some of the potential stories that can be spawned, or that can be broken off from this epic. Okay, so the first one, as a VP of marketing, I want to select the time frame, okay, to use when reviewing performance. Okay, so you're trying to review performance of campaigns. You can do that. You can review that performance by a window of time frame. Okay, or another story that you can break off of it is, as a VP of marketing, I want to select which type of campaign. Okay, so you have kind of broken down into a little more specific things uh, that conform to the invest principle. Okay, so the stories that you break down from an epic, they must conform to the invest principle. Okay, invest principle is not kind of it's not a hard line reference, but it's more of a guideline. Okay, story writing is an art, and invest principle is a very, very good guideline for you to write good stories. A good story means you're able to estimate it better. If you're able to estimate it better, you're able to deliver it without any defects, and you're inducing very high quality in the product, or the stories that you're producing, or the implementation that you're doing. So in practical world, one epic may break down itself into many stories. Okay, at least two stories. So you can see some of the bullet points here. So epics are high level. Okay, they're much closer to the essence or high level feature that you would want in your product. Okay. Epics, they use the same template as you, so you can see as a type of user, I want to do something so that, okay, this is a story template that we are using. Okay, same applies to epics as well. I have seen a lot of product owners, they write epics and they don't write any description in it, and they start breaking down stories right away. Or when they write description, it is very vague, or they have paragraphs and paragraphs of things that are mentioned in there. Okay, makes it difficult to break down the story. Okay, or if somebody has to extend it later on, it becomes very difficult. So use the same template as the user story. Epic spans more than one iteration and sometimes even releases. So you can appreciate a fact that they can have a high level feature which uh, drops down into into many. Just hold on. Okay, sorry about that. There is some interruption here. Um, so an epic can span more than one iteration, and in some cases even releases, because you can have many stories in an epic. Does not mean that you may have all the stories prioritized altogether, or it's possible that you want to you don't have enough time to work on all the stories by the time release comes in, and it's possible that the clients are able to live with the stories that you have implemented in a particular epic, not have everything in there. For example, in this case itself, if you're able to if you're able to review the performance within a time frame, that itself may be a huge value to the client, and it's releasable. You don't have to wait for the other uh, flavor of the same performance review. Okay, so it's possible that you may want to release this, and this can go in the second release. Okay, so it's not unusual for epics to span more than a release. Um, Also, in cases it is important to give an estimate for the epics too. Okay, so those of you who are familiar with the way story point estimation works for stories, we cannot use the story point estimation because epics are high level. The story point estimation of epic will be very inaccurate. Okay, so what we do is you can use affinity, or you should still use relative estimate, but instead of using hard points, you can use small, medium, large kind of affinity estimation. Okay, it's very useful. Especially because in practical life cycle, what you have is you have these high level epics first. You haven't broken down stories. You have these high level epics, and when you're trying to align it with your product backlog, you want to you you want some sense of forecast or predictability, what can be achieved and what cannot be achieved. Okay, so something that is clearly of large size or extra large size, and you have a release in a month time, you can take a very good guess that it is not going to make it in that release. Okay, so you don't have to even wait until you break down all the stories and estimate every single stories that you have decomposed off of that epic, and then summate the estimate, and then do a forecast. So just from the estimate of the from this high level uh, estimate of the epic, you can you can make a lot of decisions from the release planning point of view. Okay, so do leave room to estimate epics as well. Okay, small, medium, large, or small, medium, large, extra large. Those affinity estimation uh, buckets can be very useful there. Okay. Then you have another, just to be clear on the relationship between epics and stories. Um, every epic should have at least two stories inside it. Okay, otherwise it doesn't make sense. Okay, and it is not always necessary that every story belongs to an epic. Okay, um, because you can have stories that are standalone by themselves, which do not really have to fall in a particular category, in a particular high level things. We always have stories that are small, and you know they can be done by themselves. They don't really are a result of a decomposition from an epic. Okay. So but every epic should have at least two stories in it. Okay. I see that there are some questions that are coming in on epics, but I'm going to wait until I finish other things. Let's talk about themes. Themes are another is another way of organizing yourself. Bringing some sense of prioritization in your backlog. Why do we need themes? It is because you don't want to. It is almost impossible to prioritize between stories. Okay, you can have hundreds of stories in a particular release, right? It is very difficult to prioritize amongst those stories. Okay, you know uh, yes, I mean, you can have an epic, and that will help you do some level of prioritization, that you can say, okay, I want this particular feature, high level feature is more important than another high level feature. Okay, you can do some level of prioritization there. However, what it comes down to is that you need some kind of a categorization, some some categorization that is a little more practical, little more objective, so that you can compare. Okay, and then pull things up and down in your backlog. So a good example is that, let's say you're trying to build a car as a product. Can you really prioritize between left front wheel and right front wheel? You need them both. They're both important. Your car will not work without without either of them. Um, but you don't want to prioritize between them. Okay. Good examples of themes are performance. Performance is a great example of a theme. Okay, so you can have an epic. You can decompose itself into a lot of stories, and it's possible that some of the stories you may want to have non-functional stories in there that pertain to performance. How response time, how good a response time you want. Okay, that those kind of non-functional stories, they can fall under a performance theme. Okay, customer commitment. How many times it happens that the sales in your company or in the for of the product, they sell features that are not yet built in the product but are somewhere in the roadmap. Okay, it happens all the time. Okay, every time I ask that question um in a seminar, that is where people are physically present, and I ask them to raise their hands, almost everyone's hands goes up. Okay, we always see this kind of this kind of a scenario in practical commercial world. Okay, there are all these things that are already committed to the clients but are not yet built. Okay, so they have to be somehow bubbled up in the product backlog. Okay, so, and it's not necessary that they are coming from the same epic. or they'll fall in the same order as the epics. So you can tag them, or you can assign a theme of a customer commitment to them, and uh, you know keep them in one bucket. Another example of a good theme is reliability. Okay, how reliable is your product when you're building it, when you're shipping it to your customers? um, there could be a lot of stories, and again, this is another example of non-functional stories. Okay, your product backlog contains both functional and non-functional stories, which is why your product owners are both functional analysts and also architects or engineering specialists. So your reliability theme can be tagged on some of the stories that pertain with the reliability aspect of non-functional requirements in your product. Now, let's say you had just these three themes, and you're able to put every single story that you have in your backlog in these three themes. Now you can prioritize. You can see clearly that your customer commitment is probably going to bubble up. Okay, so all the stories that are tagged with customer commitment, you can start pulling them up in your backlog. Okay, you start prioritizing them in your backlog. Okay, and next you may want to take reliability or performance. Okay, it really depends. If you want to take reliability as your next, if that is aligned with your product vision, that you want to have your product which is highly reliable, never goes down, works all the time, no data corruption. Okay, so you can take up reliability as your next theme that you want to prioritize. Okay, so all the stories that are tagged as reliability can follow after customer commitments, and so on and so forth. Okay, so next you can pick up performance. Um, there are typically you have about 4 to 5 themes. Okay, there are other themes as well, that operability or usability. There could be a lot of themes. It really depends on um, which domain you're working in, what are your clients, what is your understanding of your customers, um, and what is your vision. Okay, so the moment you start creating more themes than 5, you are setting yourself for a problem. Okay, so if you're planning to use themes, or you have been struggling with prioritization, and themes look like a good alternative, good way of solving that problem of prioritization, and you really want to go for it, try to limit yourself to about 5 themes. Okay, anytime you go over, it becomes a problem. Okay, you again run into problems prioritization between themes, and anything less than 2 or 3 becomes a problem too, because you'll end up with a lot of things in one bucket itself, and they uh, you may not be able to finish all that in a particular release, or you may run into prioritization issues within them. Okay, so you don't want that. Okay, so that's about themes. Okay, another way of organizing backlog is using story maps. um, this is something that I read in one of the books, and I found it a very useful analogy, and I thought I'll share with every one of you. So when we talk about story backlogs, they are kind of flat. Now, what does it mean? Typically, when a particular analyst or product specialist or product owners or functional experts, when they go out, search for knowledge and do research on what are the things uh, that are expected in a particular product, or what are the things that their customers really want, they do all this research, and they come up with, as they're doing the research and gaining knowledge, they are able to create this tree kind of a structure, where the stem is really the business model of what your organization is, and then you have all these branches coming out where you can specify that these are the features, high level features that you would want, and what are certain features, such undefined features that you have on those branches. So you have all these twigs and then leaves that could be all these stories. So all the leaves could be the stories, okay, at the very end. Okay, so it is kind of a tree structure. It is not something just haphazardly put together. It stems from a very strong foundation, and then it has all these branches and twigs and leaves. So it comes out as a tree structure. The moment you just create a story backlog, you are essentially picking out all those leaves, which are your stories, and putting them in a bag. Okay, ultimately, you lose this beautiful structure that you discovered as a part of your whole research. Okay, now, which is a huge loss, because the structure is very important for you, to give you a holistic view of how things are going to look in your product. So your product is ultimately going to be a reflection. You want it to be a reflection of a tree. You just don't want all these leaves to be scattered on the ground, okay, without any structure. So there is a concept of story map, which is organized form of the stories. Okay, so you can do that with the timeline. So let's say you have a timeline from the going left to right, and what you can do is, you can, on the top of that timeline, you can have the activity, or in some sense, you can have an epic, and below that you can have all the tasks or the stories that you want to do against that activity. Okay, so in this way, what you are essentially doing is, you are doing this against time. Okay, so again, it is a prioritization. So you're starting from the leftmost side, you're going by, these are all the activities or epics, stories that I want to do, and you can start doing that in that order. Okay, does not mean that you cannot go to the next task on the timeline, but what you're trying to form a structure here is this structure. Okay, these are the things that fall under this big bucket. Okay, and on my product roadmap, I want to go after this activity or this epic first, or at least I want to start working on this first at this time. You may also start working on something else down the line, and even though you're not finished with all this, okay, but that's okay. So ultimately, even once you're done with all this, you still have the structure on what all we have done, what all we have completed, and how we approached it, and how it is going to affect the future, because you may want to do enhancements on top of this. Okay, so this is the concept of story backlog and story maps. Okay, I know it is a theoretical concept. There are tools that are available, like I'm a big fan of Jira, and all the tools from Alticean. um, they allow you to bring these kind of structures. They allow you epics. They allow you, um, create your story maps, uh, against your product roadmap. So far we have looked at epics, themes, and story maps. Okay, next next up, and this is the last one in organizing your stories and backlog. It's called minimal marketable feature, or MMF for short. Right? So uh, a couple of bullet points, more like definitions, just to make it clear what it is. An MMF is a feature. Okay, feature is high level again. Okay, that is minimal, because if it were any smaller, it would not be marketable. Okay, an MMF is marketable because when it is released as a part of the product, people would pay for it or people would buy that feature. Okay. So what we are trying to say here, I'll come to the second bullet point in a little bit. As you know, it's important to understand this concept. So stories, user stories, they follow the invest principle. Okay, so if you haven't made yourself familiar with that, I strongly recommend that you look at the invest principle, because sooner or later, every one of you, whether you are an agile coach, scrum master, product owner, or an engineer, you will have to write story. Okay, the sooner you understand those guidelines and principles, the better you would become at story writing. So stories, they follow invest principle. Okay, whereas this minimal marketable feature could be a bunch of stories. Okay, so you tell that, I've built this feature, and it is something that is marketable, it's something that is sellable. If I go to a customer, they would see a value in it and they may want to pay for that value. Okay, if you're building an email client, if you have an ability to receive emails and send emails, those two features together can create a minimal marketable feature. Okay, just those two features, you can sell them. Okay, so that forms your minimal marketable feature. The advantage of bunching these together is very obvious. It is very useful for marketing and sales. Okay, you can have your sales projections, your uh, your revenue projections aligned with these bunches. Okay, so imagine you have a vision. I'll just use the pen again. Okay, so you have this vision here. Okay, and um, you are working towards that, and this is your product roadmap. These are all the milestone on the product roadmap. And then you can have these tiny scales of minimal marketable feature, which you can put together and see, okay, I'll be able to finish these in this timeline. And it's possible that you may want to market these ahead of time. You don't have to wait for the release, but from the revenue point of view, it can be a huge, from sales and marketing point of view, it could be a huge benefit, because you know that you have built something already, even though your epic is not complete, even though your release hasn't happened, even though you are still working on certain sprints, you have built something which is of great value, and people may pay for it. Okay. Now let's look at the second bullet point. Okay. An MMF is different than typical user story. Okay. Which means, multiple user stories can be coalesced to form a single marketable feature. So, well, I think I've said that in a different form already. Okay. So you want to bunch together uh, stories which can be marketable. Okay, so MMFs are bigger than user stories. Okay, it's also possible that you have a user story which by itself is marketable. Okay, all right. So I think we are running a little bit short on time. It's have less than 10 minutes. So I'm gonna skip this part where I show the epics and themes in Jira, but I'll show it to you next time. Let's look at some of the questions here. Wait, before I go in, there are a lot of questions that you have asked in the questions panel here. Okay, I'll start from the top here. Okay, there was a question on Epic. Epic, are there any tools available to break down epics? There are, well, the tools are, your any of your agile tools that are available in the market. But really, writing user stories is an art, like I was saying. So if you have created an epic, there are no tool that will just automatically recommend you how you should break it down. It is really up to you. Okay, how well you want to follow the invest principle, and what how much scope you want to keep in them. Okay, usually a good measure is that if you're breaking down stories off of epics, try to keep them small, which is one of the invest principle already. uh, but anytime you're decomposing a huge story out of it, which is 13 story points or 20 story points, it could become a problem. Okay, so it's may have a potential of breaking it down further. Okay, can we prioritize epics? That is another question. Yes, you can prioritize epics if you choose to. Okay, sometimes we do that here as well in the company that I'm working in. But sooner or later you'll run into some sort of conflict while doing that prioritization. Okay, so those conflicts can be avoided if you use themes. Okay, another question is estimating epics. I think I already answered that. You can use affinity estimation. Okay, small, medium, large, or extra small, small, medium, large. So think of it like 4 or 5 different sizes that you want to put your epics in. It'll help you do projections. Okay, another question on themes. Uh, okay, I'm not sure if I understand this very clearly. I believe what you're asking is that is it um, when you're trying to identifying a theme, it's possible that you may want to have an engineering team. I think what you're looking for is you know engineering theme by itself is a very vague. um, you may want to, I think you're looking for non-functional themes, performance, reliability, availability, and things like that. So you may want to refine them a little bit more. Okay, there can be, I mean, if you want to go crazy, there can be many themes that you can spawn off of engineering itself. But if you just limit yourself to one or two, it should be very useful. Okay, all right. Let's look at some of the. Let's do a quick test of our knowledge. Okay, so read the question yourself, pick the answer, and please send it to me in the chat box or the questions box. Either way, chat is better. Okay, the answers are coming in. Still waiting for a few of you. I've got only a few answers. Okay, great. Um, Almost all of you got it right. The correct answer is D. Themes help prioritization, which would otherwise be difficult and confusing. Okay, that is why you would want to create themes. All right, next question. Okay, answers are coming in. Okay, great. Most of you got this one right too. I see that there was a little bit of mixed response though. The correct answer is C. Okay, what is true about story maps? They are logical grouping of stories under high level features. I see that some of you answered B. They provide dependencies. They do not provide dependencies. If you know the inverse principle of story writing very well, the first I stands for independent. Okay, so stories technically, ideally, should not be dependent. Okay, very good. Next question. Okay, great. A lot of you answered very quickly, and most of them are correct answers. Okay, so the correct answer here is C. What is true about product backlog? Product backlog contains all the unfinished stories in a product. Okay, I see some of you answered B. A product backlog must be created at the time of sprint start. That is not correct. Okay, product backlog contains all the unfinished stories that you would want. Okay, it doesn't matter. It has no relationship with the sprint. Okay, only in sprint planning you pull out stories from product backlogs and put them in sprint backlog. Okay, very good. Sorry, the dates haven't changed. Have not been changed on this slide. Um, should do that next time. Um, if there were any questions that I was not able to answer, or something that you would want to talk to me about pertaining to Agile, feel free to reach me through all these channels. I'm on LinkedIn, Twitter, Gmail. Okay, feel free to ask me anything. I will certainly take out time to answer any of your burning questions or any suggestions or comments or what you want from me. I do conduct a full-fledged agile training for 21 PDUs as a part of PMI's REP from time to time. The next one, I believe, is towards the end of this month. Okay, you can go to searchschool.com, agile classes and webinar should be easy to navigate through the menu, and you'll see the schedule there. Okay, we are still doing that special of only $2.99. It's a 2-day training on the weekend, very grilling, very all day training, all day on Saturday, all day on Sunday, close to 18 hours. You know, um, but you will learn a lot of things in there. So if you would want to join that, um, it will those 21 PDUs, they will automatically make you eligible to take the PMI's Agile certification. You should be able to take that certification if you're ready right away. Okay, thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you after 2 weeks from now. Take care and have a good weekend. Bye bye.